Okay, this is video number 2 of the concluding chapter, chapter 18 of The Rape of the Mind by Juice A. Merleau, MD. If only we could find an easy formula for the mature attitude toward life. Even if we call it the democratic spirit, we can still explain more easily what democracy is not than what it is. We can say that our individualizing democracy is the enemy of blind authority. If we wish a more detailed psychological explanation, we must contrast it with totalitarianism. Our democracy is against the total regimentation and equalization of its individuals. It does not ask for homogeneous integration and smooth social adjustment. Democracy, in comparison with these aims, implies a confidence in spontaneity and individual growth. It is able to postulate progress and the correction of evil. It guards the community against human error without resorting to intimidation. Democracy provides redress for its own errors. Totalitarianism considers itself infallible. Whereas totalitarianism controls by whim and manipulated public opinion, democracy undertakes to regulate society by law, to respect human nature, and to guard its citizens against the tyranny of a single individual on the one hand and a power-crazy majority on the other. Democracy always fights a dual battle. On the other hand, it must limit the resurgence of asocial inner impulses in the individual. On the other, it must guard the individual against external forces and ideologies hostile to the democratic way of life. The battle on two fronts. The inner harmony between social adaptation and self-assertion has to be reformed in every new environment. Each individual has to fight over and over again the same subtle battle that started during infancy and babyhood. The ego, the self, forms itself through confrontation with reality. Compliance battles with originality. Dependence with independence. Outer discipline with inner morale. No culture can escape this inner human battle, though there is a difference in emphasis in every culture and society and in every family. The combination of internal and external struggle of a mental conflict on two fronts renders the Western ideal of an individualized democracy highly vulnerable, particularly when its adherents are unaware of this inherent contradiction. Democracy, by its very nature, will always have to fight against dictatorship from without and destructiveness from within. Democracy, or democratic freedom, has to battle against both the individual's inner will to power and his urge to submit to other people. It also has to battle against the contagious drive for power intruding from over the frontiers and so often backed up by armies. The freedom toward which democracy strives is not the romantic freedom of adolescent dreams. It is one of mature stature. Democracy insists on sacrifices which are necessary to maintain freedom. It tries to combat the fears that attack men when they are faced with democracy's apparently unlimited freedom. Such lack of limitations can be misused to satisfy mere instinctual drives. However, because democracy does not exploit man by myth, primitive magic, mass hypnotism, or other psychological means of seduction, it is less fascinating to the immature individual than is dictatorial control. Democracy, when it is not involved in the dramatic struggle for survival, may appear quite drab and uninspiring. It simply demands that men shall think and judge for themselves, that each individual shall exercise his full conscious ability in adapting to a changing world, and that genuine public opinion shall mold the laws that govern the community. Essentially, democracy means the right to develop yourself and not to be developed by others. Yet this right, like every other, has to be balanced by a duty. The right to develop yourself is impossible without the duty of giving your energy and attention to the development of others. Democracy is rooted not only in the personal rights of the common man, but even more in the personal interests and responsibilities of the common man. When he loses this interest in politics and government, he helps to pave the road to power politics. Democracy demands mental activity of a rather high level from the common man. What the general public digests and assimilates in its mind is, in our new era of mass communication, just as important as the dictates of the experts. If the latter formulate and communicate ideas beyond the common grasp, they will walk or they will talk into a vacuum. Thus, they may permit a more simple and even an untrue ideology to slip in. It is not enough that an idea is only formulated and printed. We have to take care of that the public can participate in the new concept. The mystery of freedom is the existence of that great love of freedom. Those who have tasted it will not waver. Man revolts against unfair pressure. While the pressure accumulates, he revolts silently, but at some critical moment it bursts into open revolt. Those who have lived through such an outburst, freedom is life itself. We have learned this especially in the days of persecution and occupation in the underground, in the camps, and under the threat of demagoguery. We can even discover it in the totalitarian countries where, nonetheless, the terror, the resistance goes on. Freedom and respect for the individual are rooted in the Old Testament, which convinced man that he makes his own history, that he is responsible for his history. Such freedom implies that a man throws off his inertia, that he does not cling arbitrarily to tradition, that he strives for knowledge and accepts moral responsibility. The fear of freedom is the fear of assuming responsibility. Freedom can never be completely safeguarded by rules and laws. It is as much dependent on the courage, integrity, and responsibility of each of us as it is on these qualities in those who govern. Every trait in us and our leaders which points to passive submission to mere power betrays democratic freedom. In our American system of democratic government, three different powerful branches serve to check each other: the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary. Yet, when there is no will to prevent encroachment of the power of one by any of the others, this system of checks too can degenerate. And I'm sure most of you out there know that these checks have degenerated, and that our government has been intermeshed with the corporate world, the banking world, and so that almost shows that we have become a fascistic democratic society. If there is such an animal. Like adolescents who try to hide behind the aprons of parental authority rather than face mature adulthood, the individual members of a democratic state may shrink from the mental activity it imposes. They long to take flight into a condition of thoughtless security. Often they would prefer the government or some individual personification of the state to solve the problems for them. It is this desire that makes totalitarians and conformists. Like an infant, the conformist can sleep quietly and transfer all his worries to Father State. When the intellectuals lose their self-control and courage and are possessed only by their fears and emotions, the power of those with prejudice and stupidity gains. Since within each of us lie the seeds of both democracy and totalitarianism, the struggle between the democratic and the totalitarian attitude is fought repeatedly in each individual during his lifetime. His particular view of himself and of his fellow men will determine his political creed. Coexisting with man's wish for liberty and maturity are destructiveness, hate, the desire for power, resistance to independence, and the wish to retreat into irresponsible childhood. Democracy appeals only to the adult side of man. Fascism and totalitarianism tempt his infantile desires. Totalitarianism is based on a mechanized, narrow view of mankind. It denies the complexity of the individual and the struggle between his conscious and unconscious motivations. It denies doubt, ambivalence, and contradiction of feelings. It simplifies man, making him into a machine that can be put to work by governmental oil. In every psychoanalytic treatment, there comes the moment when the patient has to decide whether or not he will grow up. The knowledge and insight he has gained have to be translated into action. By this time he knows more about himself. His life has become an open book to him. Although he understands himself better, he finds it difficult to leave the dreamland of childhood with its fantasies, hero worship, and happy endings. But fortified with a deeper understanding of his inner motivation, he steps over into the world of self-chosen responsibility and limited freedom. Because his image of the world is no longer distorted by immature longings, he is now able to function in it as a mature adult. Systematic education toward freedom is possible. Freedom grows as the control over destructive inner drives becomes internalized and no longer depend on control from the outside, on control by parents and authorities. And that, my friends, is the end of part 2 or video 2 of chapter 18, which is the concluding chapter to The Rape of the Mind by Mind.wmv.